Hi everybody, I'm Rachel Walsh. I'm an assistant professor of theater here at the University of Rhode Island. I teach courses in acting and directing. I'm also a very proud URI alum. I graduated in the class of 2000. In addition to teaching, I'm also a professional director. I direct plays all through the season here at the university, but also for theaters here in the region and elsewhere. The research that I'm particularly interested in right now is thinking about the relationship between the death of Shakespeare's son, Hamnet, at 11 years old, and the ways in which that experience as a father and a husband may have shaped the writing of Hamlet, which he wrote 4 years later. Along with Twelfth Night, which features twins. Hamnet was a twin. His twin sister Judith survived him. And 4 years later, Shakespeare writes Hamlet and Twelfth Night, two plays that deal with death and siblings in remarkably powerful, deep ways, although very formally different. One is a tragedy, one is a joyous comedy. So I'm going to go to Stratford and London. I am seeing an adaptation of an extraordinary novel by Maggie O'Farrell called Hamnet at the Royal Shakespeare Company. I toured the Globe. I'm going to see Midsummer at the Globe. But most of all, my interest is to go to Stratford, visit the Birthplace Trust, and try to imagine as best one can, several hundred years later, the experience of the family, including the father, who lost a son to a disease, the plague. And then a play, arguably one of the most essential plays of the Western canon, was written, inspired in part by his death 4 years later. Audiences come to the theater to see both something about themselves reflected back to themselves, but also to spend some time imagining the life and experience of people quite unlike them. I hope, above all, that whether you're seeing a play I've directed or you're sitting in my classroom, that experience feels deeply personal and possible only because we were there together in that moment, embodied and present.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Karen LaPointe, and on behalf of the URI Foundation and Alumni Engagement, we're delighted to have you in our program today. We are happy to present the final discussion in our Fall Faculty Office Hour series, which has taken you on a tour of the fine arts in celebration of the College of Arts and Sciences' 75th anniversary. And today we welcome Rachel Walsh, Assistant Professor in the Theater Department. Moderating the discussion is Mary Beth Riley McGreen, a digital content strategist in URI's Department of External Relations and Communications. If you have questions for Professor Walsh today, please post them in the Q&A section on your screens, and we'll do our best to get to as many questions as we can after the presentation. And just a note, today's program is being recorded. In a few days, you'll receive an email with a link to the recording, along with recommended resources for further reading. And you'll also be receiving a very brief survey from us, and we always welcome your feedback. Now, I'd like to invite Mary Beth Riley McGreen to introduce Professor Walsh.
Thank you so much, Karen. Welcome, everyone. I'm so glad to be here and so happy that everyone could join us. As Karen mentioned, this semester, the Faculty Office Hour series has been devoted to the arts, 3 different aspects of the fine arts in particular, photography, music, and now theater. For our final discussion, we are covering theater, and today I'm pleased to introduce to you Rachel Walsh, Assistant Professor of Acting and Directing in the Theater Department. Her teaching interests include the intersection of performance and social justice. She is a professional theater director and dramaturge whose theater work has focused in particular on women writers and the development of new plays. Professor Walsh is a founding member of URI's Performance for Teaching and Learning, an initiative designed to use theater practice to enrich teaching and learning. She is also Associate Director of Rhode Island's GAM Theater and a member of Chicago's Rivendell Theater Ensemble. A proud URI alum, Professor Walsh earned a BA in philosophy, and soon after graduating, she became URI's first Rhodes Scholar, which enabled her to earn an MA in English Language and Literary Theory from Oxford University. Later, she completed an MFA in Directing from DePaul University Theater School. And now, with no further ado, Professor Walsh.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mary Beth. It's nice to see you and nice to see everybody, or not see everybody on Zoom, but thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to chat with you all today about my own work and interests here at the university and outside the campus community as a professional artist. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen, and I will rely on my colleagues here to let me know if, in fact, things are not working. So just bear with me for a second while I get this. All righty. I'm going to hide these down here. Okay, I think we're good. All right, so I wanted to, when I was thinking about how to approach and shape today's open office hour, I was thinking about, why does this particular discipline, why does this art form matter to me? But I actually wanted to shift that conversation from why it matters to me, this this art form that I've built as my life's work, but actually why it should matter to you all out there in the Zoom universe. Why, in fact, does theater matter at all? We live in a time where there is countless, entertainment options at our fingertips. Why on earth should we leave the cozy comforts of our own home and our couches when we can just call up Netflix or HBO and gather in a public space with other people to watch a story be told? To answer that question, we have to do some time travel. We have to head back to the 6th century, several thousand years ago, to ancient Greece and meet up with this guy, in which at a time when something pretty remarkable happened. If you were an ancient Greek citizen, you would have been gathering with your fellow citizens, and historians feel fairly confident that all members of ancient Greek society would have gathered together. That includes land-owning males, females, women, as well as enslaved persons, that all people would have gathered to watch essentially competitions of festivals, performances of storytelling, of music, of poetry, and essentially these were competitions. And by and large, for most of the ancient Greek world, these festivals taking place in amphitheaters carved into the sides of mountains would have looked a little bit like this. Obviously, Obama wasn't there, but essentially what you would be experiencing if you were sitting in this audience is a person sharing their interpretation or point of view on a particular event, let's say a war or a plague or some other important event that was important to the state. And that would have been your experience, a person sharing their particular truth about something that was happening in the society. And this guy over here with the really cool hair, his name was Thespis, and legend has it, though historians are pretty confident that this really did happen, was one of these guys, or at least he was a part of the group of folks who was making these performances, these festivals. And he had this crazy idea, which was that instead of just standing up and saying, this is what happened when Sparta and Troy went to war, this is what happened when Creon denied Antigone the right to bury her brother, he shifted his attention, instead of out to the audience, and instead to another person up there on stage with him. Now, we take this idea for granted. Those of us who go and watch plays and those of us who watch TV and film, we're watching people having conversations and essentially we're watching people have conflict. But this was a seismic change in how people gathered and watched art delivered. What Thespis invents, essentially, is two things. One, instead of being somebody who stands up and tells the gathered audience that this is what happened when Creon denied Antigone the right to bury her brother because her brother had offended the state, which is the story of Antigone by Sophocles. Instead, he said, well, what if I put on a mask and I pretend to be Creon? And what if you other person up here on stage with me, what if you put on a mask and you pretend to be Antigone? And instead of us just telling the audience what happened, what if we invent what happened and we argue about it. And what this guy with the cool hair did, is he essentially invented dramatic conflict. And so instead of watching one person say, this is what is true, what the audience is now experiencing is two people argue about what is true. Ought we bury this person who offended the state? And essentially, what Thespis invents is conflict, dramatic conflict. And this is so important that it not only changes everything about what the future of theater might mean, but it also comes at exactly the same time as democracy. Theater and democracy are born at the same time in the same place. They are essentially, cradle mates. And the reason why we think about them as being really wedded to each other is because of this idea that instead of accepting this sort of very autocratic idea that one person can stand up on a stage and say, this is what is true, instead, what theater offers and democracy codifies in a government form is that the power of making meaning comes from the people. So that if Antigone and Creon are arguing about what we owe the dead, we in the audience get to sympathize with both Antigone and Creon and develop our own point of view and make meaning in the moment with the actors on stage. This changes everything. And yes, it's a deeply flawed fledgling democracy. And yes, theater looks and sounds very different than it did in 6th century Athens. But this in particular is the sort of original moment, the origin story, the genesis of these two incredibly important institutions in our society, democracy and theater. For me, this quote by Irving Howe, who's a critic and a writer, really captures what I think is so important about theater and the experience of watching a play and a live art. He says that we enter an uneasy compact to expose our opinions to a furious action. And as these melt into the movement of the novel, he's writing about the novel in this moment, to find some common bond, some common recognition, some supervening human bond above and beyond ideas. And I think this is so important. And even though he's thinking about it in terms of a novel, I think it's absolutely equally applicable to plays and the act of watching plays, which is that we ask audiences to gather who come in with firmly held pre-existing opinions and ideas about the world. And we expose these opinions and these ideas to the furious action of the stage. And as we get caught up in the furious action of the stage and melt into the movement of the theatrical piece, we find human recognition above and beyond the rigid ideas that we might have come into the theater with. So for me, this has been very much a guiding principle in my current work, my research as a scholar, but most importantly, my work as a director and as someone who hopefully plays a role in the types of plays that audiences get to experience. As Mary Beth mentioned, I'm Associate Artistic Director of the GAM Theater in Warwick. It's a place that I've made my artistic home for over a decade now. And I wanted to start sort of my sort of gallery of work that I'm sharing with you here, because one of my very important, the jobs that I do at the GAM and I love doing is selecting a season. So when we're thinking about what plays are we going to produce every season, we are asking ourselves, what are the stories that audiences need to hear? And another way of asking that is what are the firmly held principles and opinions out there in the world that we want to expose to the furious action of the stage? And our mission, I hope, really codifies that, and that we're out, our seasons hopefully tell stories that entertain, provoke, and engage seriously the most important issues of our time. I'm going to share the Instagram reel. I take absolutely no credit for its existence because I am terrible at technology, which hopefully will not come to haunt me today. But I think it's a really good short snapshot of the kinds of plays and the way we frame them as we invite audiences to join us each season. And I will trust Mary Beth will jump on if there is a problem, but this is going to take us to an Instagram page, so don't be afraid if you're seeing sort of that landing place.
Soldiers, don't give yourselves to brutes. Men who despise you, enslave you, who regiment your lives, tell you what to do, what to think, and what to feel.
You are demanding that this city will respect the dignity of labor.
From the moment we enter this life, we are in the flow of it. We measure it and we mark it. We cannot defy it. Or can we?
I believe that if we are honest with ourselves, that the most fascinating problem in the world is who am I?
Every inhabitant of this planet must contemplate the day when this planet may no longer be habitable.
So one of the, hopefully what that does is give a little sort of snapshot into the plays that we've selected for this season. And one of the plays that is in that season, and you see it in the little Instagram reel, is a play called Sweat. Sweat is a play that I think asks a really important question. And again, going back to this idea of what are the opinions that I wonder audiences might be bringing into the theater that we can kind of shake up and ask them to really re-examine is dignity essential to a democracy? Sweat follows the story of two ex-convicts. This picture here, I'm going to take a minute to talk about it because it's something, it's a snapshot from the play that I absolutely love because one, I think it's a very provocative picture. Obviously, you have a white man with a Nazi tattoo squaring off with an African-American man and, sort of not sure what the conflict is there. But they are also two former students of mine who came through the URI theater program and joined the cast as professionals. So it's a little side note about those two wonderful actors, Connor Delaney and Eric Robles. Sweat was written by Lynn Nottage. She went to Reading, Pennsylvania, and spent 3 years researching and spending time with people who had been affected by the decline of the steel industry and the economic decline that resulted. And she wrote this play really as a testament to the lives of the men and women who were trying to make sense of their lives after the really organizing economic principles of their lives had been shattered. I included this quote here about Evan, who's a parole officer, because I think it gets at the heart of what the play really asks of its audience, which is, what role does dignity have to play in a democracy? And these two men in the play find themselves in a really violent conflict that is racially motivated, but it's really economically motivated. The play takes place in a bar where all good stories are told. And these two young men, you meet them as young men working in a steel mill that goes on strike and shuts down, and then follows their stories, which are deeply interlaced with other members of the community. And the play, as I said, entirely takes place in this bar, and you really watch characters debate the value of the work they do in their lives, what's happening when it's come under threat, but importantly, when the world becomes economically unstable, it really threatens their very close relationships to a place of absolutely life-changing violence. So Sweat was one of those plays that really, for me, is a hallmark type of play that I love to work on as a director. It asks audiences who think that they are really liberal or who think they are really conservative or think that they would vote one way or think they would think one way, a particular way about a strike or the steel industry, or who's right and who's wrong in those situations, and really asks us to melt into the action of the stage and care about the people, and then make some new meaning about not only the lives of the characters on stage, but of our own. Another play I wanted to talk about is a play called Good People. And again, going back to this idea of what's a question that a play might ask or an opinion it might shake up. This play really asks what makes a person good. Good People was a play I directed probably, I think, over 10 years ago now, but it stands out like Sweat as one of the more exciting and important pieces that I've worked on. In it is Margie, the woman we're seeing in the foreground, who this play, not unlike actually Sweat, was written about a very particular place. David Lindsay Abaire grew up in South Boston, and he writes a very true to life play about the men and women who grew up in that particular very fiercely loyal, fiercely insular Irish Catholic immigrant community, and the ways in which that community has shifted and been disrupted over the course of time as and very important, landmarks of in American history, including busing and some of those other important contextual historical events. But really who we care about is Margie. And in the play, she's a woman who is struggling economically. She's raising a disabled adult daughter, and an old boyfriend comes back into her life. And the ways in which economic divisions both, destroy lives, but also unearth other conflicts in one's family unit and communities is really thrown into relief here. Mike, the character behind her, believes in his heart that even though he came from Southie, just like Margie, he made better choices than she did. And it's just by his choices that he was able to pursue a life as a doctor and build wealth. And Margie, from her point of view, really attacks that ethos and says, that's nice that you think it was all about choices, but there's a lot of cases, in my case in particular, where the cards have been stacked against people like me. And you're wrong if you think everybody has the same choices that you do. What's lovely about this play is that Margie's also kind of a difficult character to care deeply for. She's a pain in the butt. She's very coarse, and she is, has the capacity for cruelty. So the audience really has to contend with both their desire to like her because she's the protagonist and she's the working class hero, but also the fact that she's a racist. She is not a very nice person. So again, I love this play because I think, again, it asks audiences to really shake up some of their preconceived ideas about the world. The third play in this sort of little section of plays I've directed I want to talk about is Ironbound. And this is a play that I think asks the question, what, if anything, does a society owe to its poor? And again, I'm gonna let the Instagram gods do the talking here, because I think it does a good job of kind of giving a little bit of a snapshot into what this play offers audiences.
What's most important in this life, it's this thing you have what no one can take from you. One thing, what's yours in all this world. People try to take, you fight.
Ironbound takes place at a bus stop, and it follows Daria, an immigrant who is finding work as a cleaning woman. And the play really demands that the audience kind of be awake to the ways in which we fail to provide a meaningful means of existence for the working poor. And again, not unlike Good People, Daria is not exactly the nicest person on earth. She's difficult to really love. but also she's very human, and the complexities of her life are deeply recognizable. And again, the play isn't here, like all great plays are not here to make you care about the characters only, or for you to fall in love with them, or to find an easy answer to some of the bigger questions that it asks, but instead asks you to really re-examine your own opinions about some of these bigger questions. The next section that I want to talk about is not necessarily plays that I've worked on as a director only, but some plays that I've worked on not only as a director, but as a dramaturg, which is really just sort of like a fancy name for somebody who's in the room and helping to do research and to support the production from that angle. But this next set of plays are plays that are, their content is history. And so the last three plays I talked about are really sort of ripped from the headlines, realistic plays that take place in people's homes and are really about recognizable characters. But this next group of plays are epic histories. And I love those plays as well, because I think they ask the same thing of audiences, right? We have as many preconceived ideas about the present as we do of the past. And our, old friend Napoleon Bonaparte famously said, "What is history but a fable agreed upon?" And the plays that come in this section really do remind us of that. This last season, I worked as a dramaturg on Top Dog, Underdog, a Pulitzer Prize-winning play by Susan Laurie Parks. It's a wild play featuring only two brothers. They are, although they are contemporary men, their names are Lincoln and Booth. And Lincoln, the character depicted there, plays a Lincoln impersonator at an arcade game in a sort of New York-like place. He has this quote in the play that I think is really telling about what this play is about, as well as some of the other plays I'm going to share in this section. He says, "People are funny about they Lincoln shit. It's historical. People like they historical shit in a certain way. They like it to unfold the way they fold it up, neatly like a book, not raggedy and bloody and screaming." And this play is about brothers, but it's also very much about American history, and very much about our hunger and compulsion to be able to wrap history up neatly, to put it away, and to set it aside as a romantic or sentimental version of our past, instead of contending with the real violence and the real conflict at its core. A play that I directed at URI this past season, even though more comic and less tragic than Top Dog, Underdog, is Marie Antoinette. Even though it follows the historical 18th century queen, it's written by a contemporary playwright in a very modern idiom. And as you can probably tell by the costumes, we chose to embrace those idiosyncrasies and anachronisms, and highlight the fact that this is a play not simply designed to ask questions about French history, but really this play is about America. This section here, this quote really gets to it. Marie, exasperated by the revolution that's coming her way, and that America has launched their own revolution to overturn the monarch. She says she's sick of hearing about America. We're a doomed experiment. And the revolutionary, who at that time is preparing her for her execution, says that democracy will give us what we need. And she says, I think very insightfully, even though she's at the hour of her death, "Look around you. People will just grab for what they can. They just want blood." And of course, we know what happens to her. These are some images from the URI production. And the final play I want to spend some time with is An Octoroon by Brandon Jacob Jenkins. This is a play I served as the dramaturg for at the GAM 2 seasons ago. This is an incredibly controversial play, and I can say without hesitation that working on it was sort of like being engaged in a social experiment. An Octoroon is a modern adaptation of a 19th century melodrama called The Octoroon. I include this quote as a framework because I think it's important to have in one's mind as we think about the content of this play. Linda Williams writes in Playing the Race Card that melodrama is the fundamental mode by which American mass culture has talked to itself about the enduring moral dilemma of race. And Jenkins' play, a modern take on an old American melodrama, really throws that into Technicolor and argues that the only language we have to talk about the enduring moral dilemma of race in this country is through melodrama. Melodrama asks the audience to see things in purely good and evil terms. It's a bifurcated moral universe in which there is no gray area, there is no complexity. There is the hero, there is the villain, there is right and there is wrong, and there is nothing in between. This play is provocative also because, as you can tell from the production photos, it asks some very disorienting things from the audience and from the actors. Brandon Jacob Jenkins requires that all of the actors appear in race face. So the Black actors appear in white face. The white actor appears in red face. And the biracial character appears in blackface. In this image, you see this character who is obviously a Black actor in whiteface. He plays the plantation owner, which is the quote unquote evil character from the original 19th century melodrama. The play ends in a shocking piece of not only racially motivated violence, but all too familiar violence from not only this period, but even more recent history, which is the character behind, in the background, the white actor engages in a violent beating and then lynching of the quote unquote white character, though he's played by a Black actor. The final image of the play is this. It's a very surreal image. As you can probably tell, there is a character, a rabbit, who appears very randomly in the play. I think the rabbit can probably mean a lot of things. That's the wonderful thing about symbolism and imagery, is we get to decide what things like this mean. But she carries with her two tools for justice, both the axe and the gavel. And before I leave you, I just wanted to share this quote, which is, "There is no reason and no way to keep politics out of art or artists out of politics. But these are different realms, and the values of one can be inhospitable, even deadly, to the values of the other." I share that because even though much of my work is perhaps political in theme, or takes up very big political questions or questions about society, I don't see my work as meant to be political or agitprop in any way. I think it's important that art has the capacity to reflect truth, that art has the capacity to ask us to sit with uncomfortable ideas and imagine uncomfortable past and future. But art has no obligation to be anything but true. It doesn't need to be right or comfortable or noble or even reach for a better version of ourselves. Art has only to be true. And that's why I wanted to leave with that quote, that even though much of this work might feel very political, I think it's important that above all, it is designed to be excellent art. I'm going to stop my share now. Okay. So thank you very much for sitting through that. I hope that was somewhat interesting. And yeah, I'm really excited to hear responses to my work or answer questions you might have. And hi, Mary Beth.
Hi. While we're waiting, I'm sure there will be questions. While we're waiting, one that I have for you is, could you, and this is a question that just occurred to me. So, do you remember the first experience of theater you had where you kind of lost yourself, or if that's not immediately coming to mind, the last experience of theater that you had where
Mhm.
you lost yourself in it. And could you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, yeah. So I will talk about the more recent one because it might be kind of surprising because I think my work appears to be like really, I don't know, intellectual and dark. But this was a total surprise. So in the video that you led with about my research going to the UK and working on Hamlet, I went to see a stage adaptation of this novel that I was really excited about. And I saw the play and I did not get caught up in the play. And I was actually really disappointed by it because it was the whole reason I was going, not the whole reason, one of the biggest reasons I was going. I was feeling really sort of disappointed and disheartened. And it was the last night I was in England and I was going to just go to the hotel because I was really tired and traveling. And I said, this is crazy. I've got one more night in London. I should just go see a show. I don't care what it is. It doesn't need to be for my research. I'm just gonna, and I went to see Guys and Dolls at the Bridge Theater because I was like, I just want something that's fun. For those who don't know, Guys and Dolls is not exactly like on the top of the list of everybody's like intellectual fare. It was one of the most, I'm gonna say the top 3 plays I've ever sat. Well, and to
Wow.
say I sat through it, I didn't. Everybody was standing the whole time because it was so compelling. And I think I'm not gonna, I don't want to reduce it to very like, here's the reason why I kind of got lost in it but I think what that play, that crazy raucous musical did is one, expose my own preconceived ideas
Mm.
about gender and what sexy is and what men are and what women are, what guys are, what dolls are, and really my own opinion about this play, which I thought was going to be like, don't like high schools do this? This is going to be like totally cheesy. And really reminded me why we need intense, robust, life-affirming musicals like that. So that was the last time I really got caught, which is I know kind of funny because it's like Guys and Dolls, but it was one of the best pieces of theater I've ever sat through. And again, I didn't sit through it. The whole audience is on their feet the whole time.
Yeah, that's amazing. Emil Durkheim talks about collective effervescence, that experience of where everyone in the room is sharing in a very similar emotion at the same time. And I don't know, I've never, when I've experienced that, I can't find its equal in any other experience that I've ever had, that euphoria. So
Yeah, no, that's a perfect way to put it. Collective
yeah.
effervescence. Yes.
Yeah. From Austin Farrell, who is your favorite Greek playwright? I'm going to add and why.
Oh, yeah. So probably Sophocles. I think the why would be, I think kind of sort of what I just, kind of talked through in my little presentation here. I think he does 2 really important things, which we all need to learn from, which is one, that yes, the ideas are important, but the play's ideas are revealed through character and plot, right? So, and I think a lot, he understood that the audience is only going to care about your big ideas and your big questions if you're caught up in the drama of the plot and you care about the people on stage, care about the characters, versus I'm going to foreground my ideas and make sure that you sit through this like, presentation about what is our duty to the dead or what is justice. And instead he's like, I want to tell you a really good story about Creon and Antigone, and you're going to get caught up in it. So that I think Sophocles does a pretty good job of that.
You mentioned that part of your work for the GAM, a big part of your work is selecting the season. I'm sure it's not you in a room by yourself. But what could you go through your criteria? What and I know you said, you're looking to, provide to your audience what you think they need to be seeing and thinking about in the moment. But I'm just curious. I know for myself, like I'd probably write pretty much the same thing, but for having editors who are like, we need to move away from this topic for a bit, try something else.
So, I'll be a little crass and start with like budget. We should not ignore that all art making is confined and liberated by its resources. So there's always that question that's sort of inside every conversation, not because, I think we should, because we have to just do what we can afford, but rather we have to be sure we can do it excellently. And we have to know we have the resources to do what we want to do and serve the art, serve the play. So I should say that that's always like an ever-present conversation. Can we do this play? Because there's lots of plays that we want to do. There's a play that Tony, the artistic director, wants to do that is like has 36 people in it and like a baby and a chicken. I'm like, I don't think we can do that yet. Someday. So that's, the more practical, like, this is the reality. As far as, what guides the plays that not only me, but several other people who are in the role of decision making, one is the mission, right? That we serve a mission, which is to provide our audiences with plays that provoke and ask big questions about the times we live in. There's a lot of plays that do that, right? So then how do you kind of call down to plays that fit that mission, but also feel right for this moment? Tony, the artistic director, talks about, and I think this is absolutely true, that picking a season is kind of like putting together a great album, right? You know, those of us who remember like listening to albums beginning to end, right? You get it's a buffet, right? You get a wide variety of types of material. You get, the big, huge, lots of, instruments, spectacular number, and then you get the quiet, contemplative piece. So I think, the content hopefully is consistently driven by excellence, but also plays that feel like they are speaking to a particular moment that we're all dealing with, like questions we're all asking ourselves, like what is the stories we need to tell ourselves so we can start to unpack some of the questions we're asking ourselves. But then also from a concept point of view, like what is a really like exciting, robust menu of types of plays that audiences might respond to. So that kind of answers it.
Yeah, I also was really taken with the quote from Howe, that I know
Yeah.
like you said, he was referencing novels, but characterizing novels or plays as furious action.
Yeah.
And I guess that sparks another question for me, which is, it seems like theater is kind of the last public place where, maybe churches too, but where it's phones off, mouths shut, and making meaning, right? So the audience, and we've had this discussion, you've talked to me about this, but would you talk a little bit about how important the audience is in the creation that is the play?
Sure. So Oscar Eustace, who is former artistic director of Trinity Rep, currently the artistic director of the Public Theater in New York, says, and I'll steal it because it's so true. When you walk into a movie theater and you see there's like nobody in the theater, everybody goes, yes, I get the whole place to myself. I'm gonna stretch out. And if we walk into a play and there's like 3 people in the audience, we go, oh. And part of our heart sinking isn't just like, this might not be good. It's like, well, how's the play going to happen if there's only 1 or 2 of us here? Because the play can only happen when the audience is activated and responding to what's happening on the stage, and the stage is being activated by what they're getting in the audience. And I do think there are very few places where that's happening. But I think anytime live art is happening, I think that's happening when you're going to see, live music, when you're going to see spoken word, when you're going to see, the symphony, and of course, when you're going to see the theater. And so for me, the defining feature of that isn't necessarily that everybody turns their phones on and shuts up, though I think that's important for certain types of theater. What I actually think the defining criteria and why that's important is that the art can only happen if the people are physically present. There's no substitute. We get to, there are really great versions of live theater that we can consume online. And there are. I would never say that we shouldn't offer streaming, symphonies or Broadway shows. But that's not that was made by other people who were in the room and then given to you in a replica, right? So for me, whether it's you're standing up and you're clapping along to Guys and Dolls like I was, whether you're at the, a play where you're quiet and engrossed, and have forgotten all the to-do lists and that your phone is buzzing in your bag, or you're, at a rock concert, all of that is only able to happen if people physically show up and then give of themselves. And so for me, that's really why I think, why this sort of idea of a live audience is not only essential to the art making, but there are very few places left, and art happens to be one of the places that protects it.
Mm-hmm. Another thing from a previous conversation that we've had, you talked about theater and the classroom as being two public arenas where you could have the difficult conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Have you noticed recently, like post-pandemic, our theater audience, have they changed in any way? I know in theaters, I mean, in movie theaters now, in the reels before the movie, they'll say, please don't talk, please don't do this. If you need to do that, like more direction than I remember pre-pandemic. And I'm just wondering if you've noticed anything in theater that reflects kind of very, very recent, not even yet in our history events.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. I think, yes, and this experience was true of Marie Antoinette. I think, because we have largely student audiences, we had to do a little bit more guiding in terms of what the expectations were of the audience. I do think that there is a bit of I don't know if I would say forgetting. I think we've fallen out of practice. And I don't know that that's a bad thing. I just think that we have fallen out of practice in terms of how to, and I don't think it's, so for example, like you're saying, going to the theater, going to the movies, or going to a play and having to be reminded that please don't talk and get up in the middle of the show, seems surprising. I also think, I've said this to my students, I don't think it's a character failure of the audience that they don't care enough to stop doing, serving their own impulses in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
I actually think that, especially in the case of live theater, it does require a certain amount of vulnerability on the part of the audience. You have to be open enough to be changed and to have your feelings activated. And I think that's post-pandemic incredibly hard. I think people have very strong armor on right now. And their threshold for being, kind of shaken up a bit is quite high. And so I've noticed, I think that audiences, and I would say this about my students, because it's sort of like an audience, right? It isn't that they don't care what I'm saying or they don't want to pay attention. I think they don't like discomfort. And so there are ways to evade that discomfort. You can use your phone, you can go to the bathroom, you can talk to your friend. And I think that's happening in audiences as well, that to sustain focus and attention does require you to be to be open. And I'm not sure we're very practiced at that.
This is actually the third conversation I've had about discomfort. I think there is something like, something happening that way. And I also think the snippet of the play that you attributed to Marie Antoinette, people will grab for what they can.
Yeah.
That seems to be as good a definition of conflict as any I've ever heard. When you in your own experience, how is it that you were drawn to make a career in theater? What was it about theater because you have a lot of options? You were a philosophy major. What What was it that tilted the scales in theater's favor?
I think what I love about theater is it is as much a craft as it is an art. And by that, I mean, theater is a very physically like demanding. There's as much like hands-on, like building and moving and like and physical work as there is intellectual work. And I think that I have always been drawn to work and careers that required both. So I think partially, you know, I was raised by, you know, working class parents. My dad was a car dealer, my car salesman, my mom she's is a teacher now, but when I was young, she was a bartender. I always had great like respect for and felt great meaning in anything that was like very much labor driven. Like it takes hard physical work to get the job done. And theater may not seem that that is the case, but anybody who does this job knows that it is incredibly physical. You know, you're first of all, the hours are crazy, insane long, and you're up at dawn and you're rehearsing till late at night. And it just requires like a kind of physical stamina. And so I really love jobs like that. I've always been drawn to that. So I think weirdly, there's like such a physical labor part of making theater that I loved. I'm also somebody who does very well in intense projects. I'm not very good at doing a job that requires me to like punch a clock and then like do the 9 to 5. I tend to really love things that require my complete and absolute attention for weeks at a time, and then I can like forget about it.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the actual like why the theater, I think, you know, probably why I was drawn to philosophy. Like I'm just fascinated by like the inner life, like our inner lives. What are they like in there? So I was like, for a while, I was like, do I need to like be a priest? Like what? Am I supposed to study religion? But I was like really gonna be bad at that. So you know, I had great faculty mentors when I was here at URI, and they could see that they knew that, you know, the domain of the inner life is art. And I really was drawn to that. And theater is, you know, for me, again, it's like it's deeply collaborative, it's highly physical, and it's really exciting. My students were like, you know, if you didn't do theater, would you like do movies? I'm like, no, I'd probably like, I don't know, work in an ER or something. Like it's like the drama of it, you know? So I hope that's sort of an answer.
Yeah, and selfishly, I'm glad you weren't called to either the religious life or the medical profession. But I just in the last couple of minutes that we have here, I do want to. I see a connection between the religious life and the work that you do in terms of, at least in Catholicism, the idea of mystery. And I'm thinking about the woman in the rabbit mask in Octoroon, and when we talked last, you talked about the reward of deeply engaging with a text. Could you just talk a little bit about what it, you know, what that looks like and what it delivers in terms of benefits?
Yes, I mean, one of the great benefits of working on an excellent play, and hopefully all the ones that I shared today qualify as such, is it talks to you over time. So the play that you read alone is not the same play that exists 3 weeks into rehearsal. And I don't mean that it's changed because I've done the changing, right? I've changed it to be like actors doing it and lights and all that. It's changed because it needs other people to investigate its mysteries, its hidden world. And then it starts to reveal and mirror to you some things. And I love that so much. It's why I like to work on material that I have worked on before. So there are plays that I've directed more than once, Marie Antoinette being one of them. And it's changed also because I've changed. The person I was that directed Marie Antoinette, whatever, 10 years ago or 8 years ago, I'm different. right? We're all different.
Right.
And so the things that I'm sensitized to in the play have changed. I'm a different life as a mother, as a professional, as a person in the world. I see the world differently. And a great play is talking to you all the time. And it's saying, you know, have you investigated this corner of my universe? And have you walked over on this part of the planet? And so that, you know, like the rabbit in Octoroon meant something to me in 2022. And if I were to work on that play again in 2032, it would mean something different. That's the power of symbols, right? They make they open a little, you know, a little wormhole into a little hidden universe, and you get to be sort of investigate it, but really bound also by where you are at in time and space. And then the symbol can hold another interpretation based on where you're at. And that's, I love that. And that's my criteria probably for picking plays to work on, is it's got to have that.
I think, but that's a tremendous summative statement that we, you know, people are mutable and we can change. That's really hopeful. And I also know someone who can get you a public facing chicken if you ever decide to play that Tony wants to do.
So you can talk to him about that.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Walsh, and thank you to everyone who joined us today. As mentioned, within the next few days, you'll receive an email with a link to today's recording, along with a few of our recommendations for further reading and maybe viewing. This concludes our Faculty Office Hour series on the fine arts. We hope you'll join us next semester when we continue our celebration of the 75th anniversary of the College of Arts and Sciences, when we focus on the sciences. Thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.